Welcome back to Attic Lore. Tonight, we travel back to a London that has been erased by time, a city of sirens, rubble, and absolute crushing darkness. It is February 1942. The Nazi Luftwaffe is raining fire from above, and the British government has enforced the blackout. Every window is covered with heavy cloth. Every street lamp is extinguished. To walk the streets of London is to walk in a sensory vacuum. But in the winter of 1942, the Londoners realized that the bombs weren't the only thing they had to fear. Out of the darkness came a man in an RAF uniform, a man who didn't want your money or your secrets. He wanted to recreate the Victorian horrors of Jack the Ripper under the cover of World War II. This is the story of Gordon Frederick Cummins, the man history calls the Blackout Ripper. For 6 terrifying days, he turned the West End into a slaughterhouse, leaving behind a trail of mutilation so professional it suggested a mind as sharp as his blade. Chapter 1. The Architecture of the Blackout. To understand how a serial killer could claim 4 lives in less than a week without being caught, you have to understand the physical reality of London in 1942. The blackout wasn't just a lack of light. It was a total transformation of the urban landscape. The air was thick with the smell of coal smoke and cordite. Pedestrians had to navigate by the sound of footsteps and the faint, blue-filtered beams of flashlights. In this environment, social boundaries dissolved. If you bumped into someone in the dark, you couldn't see their face. You only knew them by their voice and the silhouette of their uniform. London was a city of millions of strangers, many of them soldiers on leave, seeking a final night of pleasure before heading to the front lines. The Blitz spirit is often painted as a time of unity, but for a predator, it was the perfect cover. The chaos of war provided a constant noise that muffled screams, and the darkness provided an invisibility cloak that even Scotland Yard couldn't pierce. Chapter 2. The first victim, Evelyn Hamilton. The terror began on February 9, 1942. Evelyn Hamilton was a 40-year-old pharmacist's assistant. She was a quiet, respectable woman who was simply walking home to her lodgings in Marylebone after a night out. She was found the next morning in an air raid shelter, but she hadn't died from a bomb. Evelyn had been strangled. Her handbag had been rifled through, but the most chilling detail was the lack of a clear motive. There was no sexual assault. It was as if the killer had simply wanted to see if he could snuff out a life in the dark and walk away unnoticed. He had. The police initially thought it was a random mugging gone wrong. They didn't realize they were looking at the opening act of a spree. The killer had tasted blood, and the anonymity of the uniform gave him the confidence of a god. Chapter 3. The Soho Slaughter, Evelyn Oatley. The very next night, February 10th, the killer moved into the neonless heart of the West End, Soho. Evelyn Oatley was a former actress who had turned to the sex trade to survive the lean years of the war. She met a handsome young man in an RAF uniform and led him back to her flat on Wardour Street. It was the last mistake she would ever make. When her body was discovered, the Blackout Ripper moniker was born. The scene was an echo of 1888. Evelyn had been brutally murdered, but the killer had gone further than strangulation. Using a razor and, most bizarrely, a can opener, the killer had mutilated her body with a surgical, rhythmic intensity. The precision of the wounds suggested someone with medical knowledge or, at the very least, a terrifying familiarity with human anatomy. The news began to leak out through the fog. A new Ripper was in Soho, and he was wearing the King's uniform. Chapter 4. The Peak of the Madness, Margaret Lowe and Doris Jouanet. If the police thought they had time to investigate, they were wrong. The killer was now operating with a speed that defied logic. On February 11th, 43-year-old Margaret Lowe was found murdered in her flat. She had been strangled with a silk stocking and mutilated with the same terrifying implements. The killer had even stayed in the flat to have a drink after the deed, showing a level of psychopathic calm that suggested he felt entirely untouchable. On February 12th, the monster struck again. Doris Jouanet, the 32-year-old wife of a hotel worker, was found dead in her bed. She had been subjected to the same horrific ritual of mutilation. In 4 days, 4 women were dead. The city was paralyzed. Women refused to walk alone even in the twilight. The police were desperate. They knew they were looking for a serviceman, but London was flooded with hundreds of thousands of men in uniform. How do you find one shadow among a million? Chapter 5. The Sloppy Mistake, Greta Hayward. The spree ended as quickly as it began, not because the killer stopped, but because he finally grew too arrogant. On February 13th, a young woman named Greta Hayward was approached by an RAF airman near Piccadilly Circus. He attempted to attack her in a doorway, but Greta fought back with a ferocity the killer didn't expect. A delivery boy heard the struggle and shone a flashlight into the shadows. The killer panicked and fled into the darkness, but in his haste, he left behind the one thing that would hang him, his gas mask bag. Inside the bag was a service number, 525987. The police tracked the number to a 28-year-old leading aircraftman named Gordon Frederick Cummins. Chapter 6. The Count. Who was Gordon Cummins? When the police arrested Cummins at his barracks, they found a man who didn't fit the image of a bloodthirsty monster. Cummins was handsome, well-spoken, and charismatic. He often told his fellow airmen that he was of noble birth, referring to himself as the Count. He was a man obsessed with status and power. He had a history of petty theft and grandiosity, but no one suspected he was capable of the butchery found in Soho. The investigation into his locker revealed more than just a gas mask. The police found jewelry and personal items belonging to the murdered women, but the most damning evidence was on his hands. Cummins had a distinct set of scratches and bruises, the marks of the women who had fought for their lives in the dark. Chapter 7. The Fingerprints of a Ghost. The Blackout Ripper case became a landmark in forensic history, thanks to Chief Inspector Frederick Cherrell, Scotland Yard's legendary fingerprint expert. At the scene of Evelyn Oakley's murder, Cherrell had found a set of fingerprints on a mirror and a silver ornament. In 1942, fingerprinting was still an arduous manual process, but Cherrell was a master. He matched the prints from the bloody crime scene perfectly to Gordon Cummins. It was a slam-dunk case. Cummins had left his DNA in the form of prints on the very tools he used to mutilate his victims. The Count had been unmasked by the very science he thought he was too smart to get caught by. Chapter 8. The Trial in the Shadows. The trial of Gordon Cummins lasted only one day. In the midst of a world war, the British government had no patience for a serial killer who was demoralizing the home front. Cummins maintained an air of cold, arrogant indifference throughout the proceedings. He didn't plead insanity. He didn't show remorse. He simply watched the evidence being presented as if he were a spectator at a play. The jury took only 35 minutes to find him guilty. He was sentenced to death by hanging. On June 25, 1942, during a heavy Nazi air raid on London, Gordon Cummins was executed at Wandsworth Prison. It is a strange irony of history. While bombs were falling on the innocent people of London, the man who had used those bombs as a cover for his own evil was finally silenced. Chapter 9. The Psychology of the Blitz Killer. Why did Cummins do it? Why the sudden explosive violence? Psychologists suggest that the war created a nihilistic environment. For a man like Cummins, who already possessed narcissistic and psychopathic traits, the constant threat of death from the sky made human life feel cheap. He saw the city as a place where the old rules had burned down. He wasn't just killing women. He was performing a perverted version of the war he wasn't allowed to fight on the front lines. His use of the can opener and the razor was a way to exert total godlike control in a world that felt chaotic. The Blackout Ripper was a unique product of his time. He was a Victorian ghost trapped in a modern industrial war. Chapter 10. The Forgotten Ripper. Why don't we know the name Gordon Cummins like we know Jack the Ripper? The answer is simple: the war. The British government suppressed much of the detail of the murders to prevent a total collapse of morale. They didn't want the public to know that a man in an RAF uniform, the heroes of the sky, was a sadistic butcher. The story was buried under headlines of tank battles in North Africa and the siege of Stalingrad. The Blackout Ripper became a footnote in the history of the 20th century, but for the families of the women he slaughtered, The darkness of 1942 never truly lifted. Conclusion: The Shadow in the Mirror. The story of Gordon Cummins is a reminder that the greatest monsters don't always come from across the sea or from the sky. Sometimes they are walking right beside us in the dark, wearing the same clothes we wear, speaking the same language. The London blackout was meant to protect the city from the enemy without. Instead, it provided a playground for the enemy within. Now, we want to hear from you. Do you believe the Blitz spirit made it easier for people like Cummins to hide in plain sight? Why do you think history has chosen to forget the Blackout Ripper while obsessing over Jack the Ripper? Let us know your thoughts and your theories in the comments below. If you enjoy diving into the deepest, darkest shadows of true crime and the forgotten chapters of history, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join us next time on Attic Lore. Watch your step in the dark. You never know who's walking behind you.